Hello and welcome to another episode for the UL PhD podcast series. And today we have a very special guest. We have Professor Nigel Healey, the Deputy President for University of Limerick. So Nigel, thank you so much for giving us some time from a very busy schedule, and we're looking forward to this podcast. So Nigel, can I ask you my first question? I don't know, we won't find this everywhere. So can you tell us a bit about yourself, please, and about your interests and hobbies before we start with the research questions?
Oh, okay, good. My name's Nigel Healey. I started life as an economist, but moved into a business school. I've worked in a number of universities in UK, New Zealand, Fiji, and Ireland. So I've moved around quite a bit. And about 20 years ago, while I was in the business school, while I was a business school dean, I was very much involved with internationalization. And so when I moved to my role in New Zealand, I became Pro Vice Chancellor International, developed a very strong interest in the internationalization of higher education, the management of transnational projects. And that kind of evolved into my really my dominant research interest. And I came at it from the background in economics and management, but I studied that while I was in New Zealand. I was then Pro Vice Chancellor International at Nottingham-Trent University for 5 years in the UK. Then I went to become Vice Chancellor of Fiji National University for 4 years. And in all of those roles, internationalization was really at the fore. So, I just developed this kind of real passion for, I suppose, for broadly for internationalization, but the difference that kind of experience can make to a student in terms of, their worldview, their employability, their prospects. And so it's become, I guess, a passion of mine. My research passion has kind of grown out of what I did as an academic.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Now, I'm sure internationalization is very critical. So that's a very vast and very nice field of expertise you have. So, Nigel, my first question in terms of research be, can you tell us a bit about your research area of expertise, please?
I suppose at the moment, I guess I'm most interested in transnational education. So I'm broadly interested in the internationalization of higher education, but there's a particular form of that, which is what we call transnational education or cross-border education, which is where, universities in one country are actually providing education, not to students that come from overseas to study on our campus, but we're actually, through a series of different kind of mechanisms, we're providing education to students in their own country. What most people don't understand is that although the number of students studying internationally has been kind of growing very quickly, it's around about 5.5 million now studying outside their own country. The vast majority, 98% of all students, never travel internationally for study. So most students can never leave their home country. And so there are various ways in which universities can provide education to them in their own country. And that raises a whole raft of issues around how you best manage that. How do you kind of adapt the curriculum and the delivery? How do you deal with the host governments, with the partner institutions that you might have in that country? And so that's my main interest, is really how you kind of make that transnational education kind of fit for purpose.
Thank you, Nigel. I think we see that change in UL as well, as I know a few research students enabling this as what you're mentioning. So my another question would be, what first attracted you to your academic discipline for your PhD, and where did the research interest stem from?
Well, I'm slightly unusual in that I've actually been a PhD student 3 times. So back when I was a kind of, a callow youth, I studied a PhD when I was working, traditional full-time PhD, when I was kind of working on monetary policy as an economist. And I guess you would say that I was interested in monetary policy. I found it quite fascinating. But much later on, after I'd really got involved in this kind of area of internationalization of higher education, I started to write papers on this, and I realized that I wanted to go into it in much, much more detail. So, about, what would it be, 10, 11 years ago, I did a DBA, which is like a structured PhD at the University of Bath. And that was looking specifically at managing international branch campuses. These are the offshore campuses. So I did that. I did that PhD over about a 3 or 4 year period, but while I was working. But it was, in a sense, it worked brilliantly, because I was actually, I was working on transnational education in my job, and I was able then to kind of, interview people in country and really understand how this all worked as part of my job, and then I could write it up as my PhD. And then I subsequently did PhD by publication, which is where you pull together all your publications or your relevant publications, and you write a sort of 30,000 word summary of how these publications contribute to a body of knowledge. So I've had this kind of slightly unusual experience of somebody who's come back to doctoral study quite late in my career, and I've done these 2 doctoral qualifications in the last 10 years, and I think what kind of made me excited about all that was I realized that over my career I developed all kinds of knowledge and networks and understanding of policy that I could bring to bear on the research questions. So when I was asking those kind of research questions, I had a huge comparative advantage, which I could never have come to that research. I could never have done that research as a kind of 25-year-old or a 22-year-old, as I was back in the day when I was doing economics, sort of monetary policy work. So and I really wanted to kind of understand in detail what's going on. And it's the area that I'm looking at was studying is an area where there's very little known about it, because for most universities, these branch campuses or transnational education is taking place in countries far away, in the Gulf states, in Malaysia, in China. It's often there's commercial secrecy. There's no formal reporting of the activity taking place. So you really need a kind of qualitative research methodology. You need to be on the ground in country. You need to be sitting down having confidential interviews, analysing the results that you get and trying to kind of to figure out what's going on. So I just, for me, it was fabulous, because I kind of could unlock all these things that I kind of had thought about, but I'd never formally been able to kind of investigate.
Well, that's certainly a great experience you had. And for the likes of me and many research students in UL, we find it hard to do 1 PhD. You're doing 3 PhDs. That's certainly a sense of encouragement which all research students in UL should take from you. So,
well, I think the key thing is you don't ever stop learning.
That's true. I completely agree.
Yeah.
So have you ever had professional role models, Nigel, and what impact did they have in you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about that, actually. I mean, I've had a couple of really strong role models. I mean, one was my first, when I first became a dean. I mean, this was a long time ago now, sadly. I mean, it was probably more than 20 years ago. But I had a role model there was the Vice Chancellor. She was a very, I think, a very smart woman who kind of had figured out long ago. I mean, she was in her 60s. She'd figured out that the way to kind of get things done is to appoint smart people and to encourage them and let them get on with things. And so I kind of became the dean, and I was absolutely clueless. I have no idea what I'm doing here. And so I would go to her and say, well, what do you think I should do? And she would sort of say, well, you know best, dear, run along, you'll figure it out. And she kind of gave me my head to, she encouraged me, but she encouraged me to take responsibility and to make, to make the calls and go with my judgment, and was always there to be encouraging, but not to micromanage. That was a really inspirational kind of leadership, I think. And I had as well, when I was at Leicester University, I had a head of department who was, I think, quite inspirational in the sense that he was very entrepreneurial and creative. So we basically developed an MBA program from thin air. It became a transnational program. We ran it in centres all across Asia, across East Asia. At one point, we had 5,000 students on that program. It was the biggest MBA program, distance learning MBA program in the country. And, I spent a lot of time traveling, working with our partners in the different countries. But he was just a kind of bundle of energy. He was always kind of thinking outside the square, what can we do next? How can we move this forward? And those kind of role models are really important.
That's very good to hear. That's very good to hear. But did you ever think you'll be looking up to your role models and then you'll be doing the exact same? You're the vice president now, and you were head of the department as well in the initial years. Did you ever think you'd be in the same situation as them, as your role models?
No. No, not at all. But I think, I don't think I do come up to the standards they set. I mean, these are both remarkable individuals, and in fact, the second role model I talked about, my head of department at Leicester, is still working, is still active, and he must be in his late 70s now. He's still a member of faculty, so he's never stopped, pushing the kind of boundaries. So, and Sandra, my vice chancellor, she became very important in policy circles in the UK. So she's left her mark, that's for certain.
I'm sure you'll leave your mark as well, Nigel, for UL and the future ahead as well. So, Nigel, my next question would be, based on your experience, what is your favorite aspect of the research process?
I guess my favorite part, I mean, I started out many years ago. I was, as an economist, you're using secondary data. It's quantitative research. It's a lot of analysis. In the work I've been doing in the last 15 years, it's moved into very much of a kind of grounded theory, qualitative research methodology, and I do a lot of interview work with sort of semi-structured interviews where you're trying to really listen to the data and kind of understand what's going on. And that is by far and away my favorite part of that is just sitting down, in a quiet office with somebody and slowly kind of picking their brains and having them tell the story and understanding, getting that really deep understanding of what it is that's going on in this particular context. And then obviously the hard work comes, because you've got to kind of transcribe all these interviews and start doing the discourse analysis and draw out all the threads. But my favorite part, which I'll never stop loving, is actually being able to get time with a president or a provost for a couple of hours and just having a confidential recorded interview where you really kind of get to the heart of how this all works.
Oh, that's a very great experience to hear from you, Nigel. No, that's very rewarding for me as well. And in terms of rewarding, I think you've done 3 PhDs and you've on different fields, the 2 of them. What aspect did you find the most rewarding from your PhD research, either in the economist field or in the internationalization field?
Well, the first time around was a long time ago, so I can't even remember that. I think what I kind of I think what you kind of find most rewarding is when you start to kind of discover the patterns that no one's seen before, and you kind of realize, that's how this works. This is how, and there were a few of those seminal moments where I remember when I was doing my DBA, I'd done all of the kind of analysis of the data, and I was getting onto the kind of discussion, the kind of the so what. Well, so what does all this mean? What have you found? And I was a little bit daunted, I thought, I don't know what it all means, And I just sat down and started writing. And it was magical. It kind of began to click into place. That's that. Oh, I see. I've got it. That's how that works. That's how it all fell into place. And I had I had my theoretical framework, and I had all this analysis. But as I started writing, it just all suddenly started to slot into place. And I thought, got it. That's how it fits. I've figured that out. And I don't think, I'd never read, no one had ever done that before. No one had ever really kind of worked it out before. And so it's that moment when you suddenly have clarity and you can see, I posed a research question and I haven't got a vague answer. I've suddenly understood, yes, that's how it works. That's how I think this all fits together. So that I think is where, the kind of real reward comes.
Oh, no, that's really, again, it's something I'd really be motivated listening to you, and I'd probably go and hear back this podcast again just to motivate myself. So I'll bring this to my last question, Nigel. I know carrying out a PhD, there's loads of challenges between work-life balance, teaching, research, administration issues, etc. What would you do differently if you were a younger researcher again, back in your time, and you could go and do your PhD again as a young researcher? And also, what advice would you give to UL PhD researchers for their journey at the moment?
That's a really good question. I think when I was trying to do it the first time round, I was a full-time student for 3 years on a scholarship. It seemed like I had limitless time. I don't think I valued that time. I think I wasted a lot of time going down blind alleyways, reading and reading and reading without ever kind of saying enough with the reading. Let's just kind of, we need to start nailing this down, with a work plan and what's my research methodology, what's my research question, what's the appropriate methodology. I think what when I came back to this, when I sort of came back second, third time round, I was in a full-time job with a family with youngish kids. Time is very, very precious for me. When I was doing my DBA, I actually had to work sort of 12, 13-hour days, Monday through Thursday, to carve out the Friday and the Saturday as research days. So though they were incredibly precious, because I fought for that. I had to actually kind of, tell people, no, I'm not doing anything on Friday. Go away. This is my research day. I've worked till 7, 8 o'clock at night every week to make this space. So I really valued that time, and I was incredibly disciplined. So I would get up early. I would be at my desk in the library at sort of 8:30 in the morning on a Friday, and I would stay there till kind of 7:30 at night. And I'd do the same thing on Saturday, and I kind of got I suppose I kind of extracted every second of the day and was very, very focused. Now, I think if I had had that focus 30 years ago, it would have been a different story. But as it was, the first time round, I wrote a rambling thesis, which was 250,000 words, and it was dreadful, and they kept making changes, and I just ran to the sand. I think, what I've learned is value the time and use it wisely. And kind of have a kind of very clear work plan with clear signposts. What you need to do. When you've got your research question, you need to determine your research methodology. Once you've got your research methodology, design your study. You need to know what your theoretical framework is going to be, what your conceptual framework is going to be. These are all the big questions. You need to nail them down quickly. Don't just drown in, I'm reading 10,000 different papers. When you know what what you want to do, you can then look at the literature very critically and say, no, that's no use to me. That doesn't help. That's not what I want at all. Here's somebody who's who's got some insights that I can use. So I would, and that's the only way I got through second, third time around was by being kind of disciplined and saying, this is my research time. I'm going to value it and I'm going to use it. And obviously then, it's the only way you can really keep this work-life balance or even your work balance, because, there's the day job that's got to be done as well. So that would be my advice from my old self to my young self is, I'd say to my young self, you were an idiot. You had all that time and you just wasted it. Look what you could have done if you'd been focused.
Thanks a lot, Nigel. Now, I think anybody who's listening to this podcast, they'll probably know the essence of time and all the encouragement and all the research methodologies and explanations you've given on how to carry out research. I think that's very critical, and I hope anybody listening, they take this into account and hopefully pave their ways to do research as you've suggested right now. Nigel, that brings me to the end of this podcast interview, and I'd really like to thank you for your time, and it was lovely talking to you, Nigel. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. I think it's a great privilege to have the space to be able to to work on a research project that you really love. So I'm very jealous of you. I wish I was back in your shoes.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Thank you.
All right. Good on you. Thanks a lot.